Hi, it's a warm and balmy Monday afternoon where I am. Welcome to the Library of Alexander, and here is what I'm thinking about. How we kill the ones who care. I'm not sure if you've heard of Joko Willink before, but he's a ex-Navy SEAL who has a podcast, which I believe is called something to the effect of Discipline is Freedom. But anyway, there was one particular section where he talked about aggression in soldiers and how it was a desirable trait. And his definition of aggression was not so much of bloodlust, rage and anger and animalistic fury, but rather aggression in preferring action over passivity. And I think that's a really nice idea of aggression, and most people should be set to be aggressive by default, because that would mean that whenever they see a problem, they see a need that needs to be fulfilled, they step up and they do something about it. And in fact, there are a lot of problems that need aggressive people to solve things from a ground up level, because they're either too small but painfully critical, too small to be solved in a top-down manner, but otherwise very painfully critical or otherwise necessary for a lot of nice things to happen. But that's the thing, you see. There's no reason for people to step up. There seems to be this common malaise that I see throughout society where people don't want to step up and do things. They don't want to volunteer themselves. They don't want to help, which is kind of strange, don't you think? You would imagine that if it's a problem that needs to be solved, someone would want to step up and do something about it. But it's not. That's not how it is. And I've been thinking about it for a few weeks, and I realize it's because we punish people who step up. Because we treat them in ways that make it unpleasant to volunteer, to show any form of initiative. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how we kill the ones who care. The first way we ruin the people who volunteer, the ones who do have initiative and step up, is that we take them for granted. This seems to be a very common thing. It's a thing that seems to be perpetual in human relationships, that someone's going to take something for granted, and then when they realize that it's gone, everything goes kaput. But usually there are a lot of thankless but critical roles that are required in social groups. Let's say you need someone to organize something, to plan an event, right? And it's quite thankless because let's say they need to plan a gathering, they need to spend the mental energy to do the decision making, deciding on the time, deciding on the place, canvassing votes on different activities and schedules and whatnot, and harmonizing all this. This is all very difficult and tiring stuff. But at the same time, it's also painfully thankless. People just sit on their ass, expect to reap the rewards of this activity, and then they just kind of stare at each other and wait for someone to step up, and then someone cracks and then does it. And the terrible thing is that sometimes there is someone who does, they find it within themselves, the will to step up and say, hey, okay, don't worry about it. I'll plan it out. I'll take the initiative. Why don't we do it at this time? Blah, blah, blah. They bear that burden of responsibility. And often this is intended to be a one-off act of kindness. The terrible thing we do to them, however, is that the moment they do this, we expect them to do it again and again and again, as if they were doing a favor to us. And this is something I experienced. As a sort of one-off act of, like I said, kindness, I decided to lead a conversation in this group that I was in. And all of a sudden, the next session that we came back together, I straight up said, hey, I won't be talking much today. I'm having a splitting headache. I'm not feeling very well. And I just finished my exams. And then after a period of awkward silence, people are saying, hey, we need someone to lead this conversation. Hey, Alex. And I just kept quiet, because it was obvious to me that if I entertained that little bit of social pressure, if I gave in at that point, they would expect me to lead the conversation time and time and time again. The thing is that people don't realize that leading conversations, or people realize, but they don't acknowledge that leading conversations, thinking about content, bringing up material, setting agendas for discussions is an incredibly taxing task, or at least it's a non-zero amount of effort. And to expect someone to continuously give after they did it once is an easy way of turning off future offers of assistance. Because imagine this. You do something once, and then people expect you to do it again and again, and they might even expect a certain amount of service from you, even though it's not your duty whatsoever at all. And then you get burned, right? You realize, oh shit, I step up and I get punished for it. And then the next time you decide, that's not fair. I don't have the bandwidth to commit to anything. So you pull back. And by doing simply that, you've punished the behavior that you want to see, and people are no longer going to find it within themselves to do something. And if I'm going to make it's pretty obvious, I think it's pretty intuitive to see that a one-time action requires crossing a sort of activation, a much lower activation energy, a lower investment. It has a smaller investment compared to, for example, a long-term commitment to continually do something over and over and over again. I think this is an idea that might have popped up in Atomic Habits by James Clear, or I can't remember this other psychologist, but I think his name is like H.G. Fogg or something to that effect. I'll put that down in the description. But his book is called Tiny Habits. And the idea is that there is an action line that you need to be above, where if you have, the harder the task, the more commitment you need, the more energy and willpower to go over the action line. The smaller the task, the more time, it's much easier to go over that barrier. And this is precisely what's happening, right? If you turn every small contribution into suddenly a commitment, a responsibility, a duty, a burden that you just shovel onto someone else, then suddenly that activation energy, that the amount of will and effort and kindness and generosity that's required to cross the line is going to just skyrocket infinitely. So the first thing we do to kill the ones who care, to kill any form of initiative, is by taking our volunteers for granted. The second way is not so much a way that we punish volunteers, but this is how we find ourselves saddled with ineffective leaders or ineffective administrators or whoever is stepping up to do the task. So it's kind of in line, it's kind of related to the previous idea of taking people for granted. But the idea here that I'm introducing is that the leaders and people that we choose who step up, they are often the weakest link. And this is often the case for obligatory but otherwise unwanted roles that are just perhaps saddled with burdens but with none of the benefits whatsoever. So the idea here is that let's think, for example, let's say there's a committee that needs to be filled, right? And the committee has no power whatsoever. It's just saddled with administrative work that really does nothing for anyone whatsoever. And we have a bunch of volunteers who are unwilling volunteers, a bunch of people, and we tell them that, hey, no one is leaving this meeting until we fill the committee. And you realize how this sets up an incredibly tense and uncomfortable situation, because now you're holding their time hostage against essentially what is future time, a future commitment, right? So now there is this balance between willingness and discomfort. Maybe there are people who are a bit more willing, but the amount of discomfort that there is in the how to put this, what motivates them to cross the action line is not so much their own willingness to invest in this committee's actions or this committee's roles or fulfilling those tasks, but instead the transient and temporary discomfort that they are experiencing now in that meeting. And you can see how that is essentially a setup for creating a bunch of filling a committee with people who are otherwise completely unwilling and not so capable at doing that job. Usually, this is like, newly staffed positions, people are completely new, and then you say, we need to form like we need to form this committee for this class, blah, blah, blah. But they're new. They don't know each other. There's no buy-in. There's no reason to commit. They don't feel a sense of community to that class. They don't feel a sense of belonging. There's no reason to to put themselves out there and contribute, right? So in the end, the leaders, which I put, I hope you can hear it in my voice, but there's semicolons in this, the leaders who, sorry, not semicolons, but like apostrophes, right? The leaders who step up are those who aren't who aren't actually the ones who we want as leaders, right? They are the ones who have the least tolerance for discomfort, right? Regardless of how willing they are, usually it's the ones who have the least tolerance for discomfort who crack, they buckle first, and then they say, okay, fine, you know what, to get out of this meeting, I will take it up. And that's the kind of people that we don't want in leadership positions, because if you're going to be making decisions, they're necessarily going to be, at some point, it's going to be an uncomfortable decision, right? And at the same time, because they have no buy-in, they feel shoehorned into a position that they otherwise don't want to be in. And instead, they feel like, oh, you know, because I took this on, I am doing everyone a favor. They feel they've already paid their due, right? So further down the line, there's really no reason for them to work hard, to invest time, and do well in that role. In a slightly less palatable way of saying this, these are the people who don't have the social capital required to be leaders. If we look at, I can't remember the full name of the author, but White's, with a Y, Street Corner Society. This is a book that studied the mechanics of gangs in post-World War America. I'm not exactly sure of the time, but it looked at the structure of not so much gangs, but they're more of social groups, and what the social dynamics are on the inside. Leaders often have a lot of social capital because they provide for their people, and people defer and listen to them because they know that, you know, within that structure they will be cared for, they'll be cared for, they have a sense of belonging, and they know that their place in the structure and all that. The people who, you know, in our case of hypothetical committee, the ones who crack first usually are not so high in the social totem pole, and they are precisely the kind of people who cannot be foisted into like some sort of executive or decision-making role, because they don't have the influence required to fulfill that role. It's very unpleasant to say this, right? Maybe we want to think, oh, you know, there's equality and whatnot, but it doesn't change the fact that leaders still rely on social influence, right? Social capital that they can essentially buy and trade decisions and agreement and influence with. So there's that. We end up shifting, because of the systems that we use to get certain roles filled, we end up filling them with incompetent and unwilling people. And that is an easy way to kill the willingness and initiative of many other people, because there's no reason for them to step up and work under someone who they feel is otherwise incompetent, right? And the worst thing is that we often turn around and say, well, if you're going to critique that person, if you're going to criticize that person and say that, hey, you're not doing a good job, why don't you do it yourself? And then we punish them, we take them for granted that even though they may be giving good advice, they might be pointing out something that's critical, we turn it around and we make them commit to something that they are otherwise unwilling to do. They might not have the means to commit to it, and that's another problem altogether. The last way we kill the people who care is that we never reward good behavior. We punish it with more work. For example, let's say we ask for volunteers to take on a role that otherwise would cost a pretty penny. We essentially let's say it's a school that turns to students and hey, you know, dear students, and it says, dear students, we need you to volunteer for something that, you know, implicitly they're saying that we can save money by not hiring some external professional to do, right? And let's say a student has goodwill to the school. They want to give back to the school. And they step up and they say, sure, I will do that. I will do it for you this time because I agree. I want to do this for you. But instead, what do we do for people who step up? They become a target. They paint a target on their back, asking to get shot over and over and over again. Because the next thing you do is that, like, once this thing is done, we realize, wow, this person is helpful and willing to do things for us for like no remunerations, no rewards whatsoever, no recompense. And then we go to them again and we say, hey, can you help me with this? And another thing, and then another thing, and again and again and again. And the terrible thing that this does It's not so much that, okay, one is we rapidly deplete their goodwill by not rewarding them for good work, but it marks them, it highlights them as just another person, another resource to exploit. And the terrible thing is that it signals to the rest of your population, the rest of your community, that this person, right, has made a mistake. By stepping up, they are not rewarded, they are not celebrated, they are punished for working. They are essentially martyred into a sort of symbol of anti-initiative. They become a warning, not a hero to look up to. And that is the surest way of killing any thought of stepping up and helping any community, or fulfilling any role, or volunteering for anything. It's hard. It's hard. Of course, people by their nature are lazy. People want to have things given to them. But it doesn't change the fact that we still need people to step up. Of course, it's an uphill battle. But wouldn't it be much easier if we weren't shooting ourselves in the foot every single time? Why do we punish the people who step up? Why do we not reward them? Why do we not recognize them? Why don't we give them something that's actually tangible, apart from empty, hollow praise? People can see through that kind of hollow praise. Anyone who has a cognitive age above 12, I would imagine, would be able to see that, hey, just saying thank you is not really enough. And all that does is just discourages everyone else, because it becomes a warning, right? The person is martyred. They are essentially hung from a cross as a warning to everyone else that stepping up and being good and contributing to this community doesn't end well. We must be careful with how we treat those who step up, who volunteer, who offer their services for the greater good. Because if we don't treat them right, there will be none left for tomorrow.